Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Flying Goat Farm podcast with me, Lisa Check. Today we're going to be talking about color harmonies. But first, here's what's happening on the farm. So we are on the cusp of starting May, and most of our orchard has already bloomed and is now leafing out. I'm not quite sure what kind of fruit has been set. We had a little bit of a glitch with the bees. Our bees died over the winter, and the bee guy brought in new hives, new animals, and then one of the two queens died, so he had to do some more machinations. So I know that there's some good bees out there. I can see them on my wisteria. And so that's great because we need to have some pollination. Not sure that happened with our fruit trees. So we'll just have to see what happens as the seasons march on. So yeah, the bees have been rehabilitated, shall we say. And Bill he took a hydroponics class this winter. And so now he's making these great tomato plants that look like they would have cost you $12 or $15 at the garden store, but he grew them from seeds. And that's all because he was giving them the right amount of sunlight, giving the right amount of pH, giving them the right amount of nutrients. And oh my gosh, it is, the last week of April, and he's got buds on his tomato plants, which is unheard of here in the mid-Atlantic state. So that's pretty cool. And that's really kind of what's happening. Maryland Sheep and Wool is next weekend. And so even though I dye almost every day, I've been dyeing a whole lot more just to try to be prepared for that. So be sure and check out our website, flyinggoatfarm.com, and see if you see any roving or yarn that strikes your fancy, because there's a lot of new things up there. So today we're going to be talking about color harmonies, and here's where we're at so far in this part of the podcast. So this is the third of this color series. And so already we've talked about the physics and the biology of light and how we perceive color. We've talked about the 12 different hue families. That's red, orange, yellow, yellow, green, blue, blue, violet, and red violet. So those are the basic 12 colors in our world. And then we've also visited our collections to look to see if there are any holes or color families that aren't represented. Because it's great to have some of everything, and you'll see why when we starting this episode talking about color harmonies, and then talking more and more deeply about those color harmonies. And in the last episode, we looked at how those 12 colors go to hundreds or thousands of different colors just by looking at tints and tones and shades. So just to recap, the tints are the color added with white, or with dyes, it's just a more dilute dye. A tone is the color added with some gray, so it's a little grayed out. And the shades are the color added with black. And we talked about value, and we talked about saturation, and all of those things also give us more perceptions of color. And hopefully you have also made a Pinterest board or somehow to collect the colors that you really gravitate to collect photographs, not of yarn, but of landscapes or flowers or animals or anything that you look at that picture and say, oh, I love that picture. And those pictures that you collect will give you some sense of what your own true color sense is. whether you're a blue lover or a purple lover, or whether you like warm colors or cool colors, all those things will become more clear when you look at what kind of photographs you gravitate to when you say, oh, I love that. That is something that I really want in my life. And so put it on a Pinterest board. I'm telling you, it'll change your world. So today we're going to start talking about how colors work together. And the term that's used for that is color harmonies. And as we'll see, some things are more harmonious than other things. The first harmony that we'll talk about is being monochromatic, and that's pretty self-explanatory. It just means that all of the colors in that set of yarn or in that skein itself are in the same hue family. So they can be different shades or tints or tones. They can be different values. They can be different saturations too. But they're all in the same hue family, and so they're considered to be monochromatic. Mono meaning one, chroma meaning color. And it is, I believe, it's the most harmonious of the color harmonies, because there isn't anything really to clash about. Except, of course, there always has to be an exception, right? So there are some times, some color families where if you have a warm you can't call it a shade anymore, right? A warm color in that hue family and a cool color in that color family, they don't actually get along. And my example is, if you have a warm red color, which is going to be more on the side of orange, it's not orange, it's not red orange, but it's just slightly a little bit more yellow background to that red. And you have a red that is slightly on the cooler side, so it's slightly more blue. It isn't purple, so you can't say that. But it's just a little bit to the blue side. Those two colors will clash. And so it's always good to put together any of those. If you've long been a collector of red yarn or roving, to put those together so you can really see this for yourself. And you can see that, this one is more toward the orange side, this one is more towards the blue side, and they do not work together very well. I think that's the biggest clash that I ever see is within the reds. I'm trying to think if there's any other color family where you have that big of a clash, and I can't really think of one where that's such a big. The only other one would be maybe purple. So if you have a violet, you have a straight on violet, and you have a purple that's more to the blue side, and you have a purple that's more to the red side. Sometimes those can also really clash. So again, auditioning your collection will really help you. And sometimes you just put those things together. I do this all the time in the shop. We'll put something together and say, oh, no, that just does not work. That's not right. Let's look someplace else. So the next color harmony is analogous colors. And oh my gosh, this is my favorite harmony. I use it all the time. And I keep telling myself, you need to break out of this pattern, Lisa, because, it is one of my favorites, and I use it all the time. So analogous colors are those that are right next to each other on the color wheel. And they work really well together because they have those secondary and tertiary colors right alongside with them. And so it's a natural bridge from one primary to the next primary. You have these natural bridges with the other hue families in between. So my two favorite ones are blue, green, violet, and red, orange, gold. Those are my two favorite ones. But also you could have like red, violet, red, and orange, and red orange is also beautiful, like sunset colors. So thinking about like three colors that are right next together on that color wheel is always going to give you something that is really harmonious because of those color bridges. All right, complements. This is what we think about when we think about, how do colors work together? Is, you know about their complementary colors. You learned about these, way back in elementary school. So complementary colors are colors that are across the color wheel from each other, directly across. So the easy ones are red and green, orange and blue, purple, yellow. And this color harmony is, I believe, in my own opinion, it is the least harmonious of all of them. And that's because when these colors get next to each other, they vibrate against each other. They are so, opposite in how our brains and our eyes function that they cause like a vibration between them when they're right next to each other. So yes, they are exciting, but you need to use them with some care. So when you're using complements in garments, you have to be careful. And that is because of this, number one, the vibration. If you are putting big stripes of these colors against each other or next to each other, you're going to have some uncomfortableness, I think, with these two colors. If you had a big stripe of yellow, like a bright sun yellow, and you have a big stripe of purple next to it, it's not going to be something you go, oh, that's so pretty. It's going to be like, oh, that is really exciting. So you just have to be careful about that when they're in big stripes next to each other. But the other thing you have to be careful of is if they are in smaller pieces or if they cross each other, which could be like a certain kind of stitch that they use. For me, I think I've told you before that I started out as a weaver, and this complementary color problem is something that's really common to beginning weavers. And that is when everyone, when they first start being a weaver, they want to make like a runner, a table runner or something for holidays, for Christmas. Red and green. I'm going to do red and green, and I'm going to do a red warp, and I'm going to do a green weft, and it's going to be so Christmassy. And then because they cross each other and they're little bits of color, your eye mixes them into some kind of a hideous brown color. If you look very close up at it, yes, you can see red and green. But if you are farther away from it, it looks to be neutral. That's because the colors are kind of canceling each other out. So this is something that if you are using a stitch that will cross over and there are small bits of color, not long runs of color, that you want to be careful of. Like if I had a small repeat of red and green or purple and yellow, I don't think I would be doing a linen stitch with it, because there you have things crossing over each other, kind of like they're woven. So you just want to be careful with that. Another one of the pitfalls is in the yellow and violet complement. I bet this could be also, use this as the example because it's the most blatant, but it also can happen in any of the complementary color combinations. And that is that violet tends to be the most dark or most saturated of the color families. And yellow is just naturally light. Even at its most saturated, it is really a light value. So there's really a gigantic value difference between the violet and the yellow. And that can cause some really big vibrations. So here's what I would say to you, and that is just to audition your skeins. Put them, if you have skeins that you say, oh, look, I got this one. It has yellow and it has purple in it. And now I know that those might cause vibrations. So audition it, take it out, untwist it out of its hank and put it with the other colors that you were thinking of using. Or if you were thinking of using that one hank, maybe it's a pretty highly variegated one and you were thinking about making socks, just like undo it out of its twist, lay it out, maybe fold it around each other, kind of manipulate it, and put it somewhere that you walk by a lot, but not somewhere where your cat or dog can get it. Ask me how I know. Then every time you walk by, you're going to look at it. You're going to look at it and you say, oh, do I like it? And if I like it, then I'm going to go ahead and use it. But if I don't like it, then I need to change up something, especially if you're looking at like 2 different skeins or 3 different skeins. You have them all undone. You have them intermingled with each other, kind of like if you were going to be using them. And then every time you walk by, if you say, I don't love it yet, but I don't hate it, then manipulate those skeins again to make it a little bit different configuration. Leave it. The next day, walk by. And then, just keep playing with it. And if you still like after, several manipulations and you're like, well, it ain't bad, but it also isn't something that I love, then you need to change something. Just like we've talked about before, you want to be in love with what you're making. You want to be in love with the final outcome. And so if you're not in love with it in the skein, you need to change something up. All right, so gradients. And typically gradients are going to be, by definition, monochromatic. So a gradient means that there's successive skeins or mini skeins, or it could be fabrics if we're talking about quilting, or it could be rovings as well, where you have very dilute color going to more saturated color. It's a gradient from, very pale to very dark in the same color family. And the only thing you need to worry about with this kind of using these kind of skeins is deciding how do you want the gradient to go. Wherever the dark part of the gradient or the most saturated part of the gradient is going to go, it's going to be it's going to have the most weight. It's going to be the place where people look. So if you want people to be looking at your face or your upper part of your body, then you want to start with the dark at the top and go to light at the bottom, and vice versa. And then there are progressions, and most people will still call these gradients, and most of the time these are also in mini skein packs. I love these because they're just such a fun experiment. So a progression is where you start at 2 ends of a colorway, basically. But each of these ends is going to be a full skein. So at each end, you're going to start with a fully saturated color. And then you're going to march towards the center by changing up the proportions of the 2 colors until in the middle one of the progression will be like a 50-50 blend. So for instance, you can go from green to blue. All right, I'm going to start in this on one side. I'm going to start with like a forest green. The other side, I'm going to start with like a royal blue. So starting from that green side, that first one's going to be green. Then I'm going to add a little blue to it. So now it's green blue or blue green. And then the middle one is going to be teal, where those are actually 50-50. And then the one closest to the blue is going to be more blue than green. And then you'll have the true blue. So these are fun because you can also, get into these chromatic neutrals, which is what I'm going to talk about next. Because, anytime that you are basically in a progression, you're combining these two colors to come up with 5 different colors, or it could be even more, but at least 5 different colors from these 2 that you started with. And I love them. I think they're more interesting than using a gradient because you do have, these different nuances between the colors. It's not just one color, but it's 2 colors interacting together. And again, the design consideration with these is to decide, where do you want the more weighty color to be? And you can go either way. It just is your decision about how to do that. Or you can even go, we were talking about, blue-green progression. So you could go green, blue to green if you had, 2 of these progressions. So think about that as a design consideration. And then here are these chromatic neutrals. These I love because these are, tertiary on tertiary on tertiary. At first glance, when you look at a neutral color, you might think, oh, that's a brown or that's a gray. But these chromatic neutrals are made from complementary colors. They're made from complementary colors mixing together. If you do a 50-50 blend of a complementary, 50% red, 50% green, you're going to get some kind of a grayed out brown color. But a little bit to this side, a little bit to that side, and you get these really interesting neutrals that still have a background note of the original hue family. And so these are really, really interesting. And some of my yarns, especially my resistance yarns, where, I'm playing with working across the color wheel, they have spaces in those skeins where you have these fun chromatic neutrals, and you have the neutrals going into that color family and going out of that color family into the next one. So it's kind of like working with complements and neutrals and progressions, and it's all in one skein, and it makes it really, really fun. Can you tell where my passion is? I think you can. So until next time, here's what you can do if you're following me on my journey. So again, I'm going to ask you to visit your collection. And this time, I want you to look for skeins that could fit together. I mean, way back when I started season 2, and we're talking about being the curator of your collection, we talked about putting together different skeins that could go into a shawl. And so maybe you pull out those skeins that you put together and look at them and see, oh, how did I put those together? Are those analogous colors? Are those monochromatic colors? Are those, analogous colors? Thinking about, how did you put it together in the first place? And would you do it any differently? And then also looking for skeins now that you could also put together, whether it's monochromatic that might be in the vein of being a gradient, or they might be analogous skeins, so they would be going towards a progression kind of idea, or if they're totally complementary colors because you just want to do something that like wows you, like a Stephen West shawl that's going to like knock your socks off, and like go for the compliments. And I also I want you to look at your neutrals. Are they just black, white, and gray, or are they some kind of these chromatic neutrals that I was talking about? That would be really interesting for you to look at. And as usual, I would love to see what you're working on. So if you post these to social media, tag me. I would love to see them, or send me an email and show me what you have, and we can talk about those. Because as you can tell, color is kind of my passion. I love working with it. I do work with it every day, and I would love to see what is in your collection as well. And I hope that all of these ideas that I'm giving you, and tasks that I'm giving you, are also they're also building up your confidence in your own decision making as to color, because that's really my intent here. So until next time, happy making.